Turn your Bibles to John chapter 11. We're going to start with verse 17. Today I would like to talk to you about when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. I would like to explain to you what this story means to me, and I would like to explain to you why it's so close to my soul. Because you see, there was a time that I was yet dead, and now I'm alive. There was a time that this great Jesus that I'm fixing to preach to you about, this great Jesus that I'm fixing to tell you about, this great Jesus that I'm going to claim to you about, the one that hung on the cross, the one that raised from the tomb, the one that became alive again, and the one that's coming back for us. I want to tell you about him. So let's start with verse 17, and it says, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. And whoever lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him, he asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people. Standing here that they may believe, you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary, who had seen what Jesus did, put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. You see, there was a time in my life where me and Lazarus had a whole lot in common. The only difference is Lazarus spent 4 days in the grave, and I spent 28 years in the grave. You see, May 1st, 1983, this great Jesus that I preached to you spoke to me as I sat up on my camper trailer on the bed, and I sat up with my normal hangover and my normal wants and desires. When the Lord said, Sam, go to church. And I said, Lord, I can't go to church. They don't want me in church. You see, Lord, the truth is I stink. Or as Lazarus said, I got a bad odor. or as the King James Version says, I stinketh. But the Lord said, Sam, get up and go to church. So I got up, and as Johnny Cash would say, I put on my cleanest dirty shirt. I was nasty. I hadn't washed. I hadn't showered. I hadn't cleaned in probably 2 weeks. I had plenty of drugs. I had plenty of booze. I had everything in my little camper I needed, but I didn't have electricity and running water. But I got up and I went out the door, and I went to the end of the trailer park, and I stood on the hard road. And I said, Lord, which way do I go? And he said, take a right. And I said, no, Lord, I can't take a right. I don't know what's that way, but I know what's to the left. I'll go that way. He said, no, go right. I said, but Lord, I know what's to the left. I know there's the drugs and the alcohol and the booze, and all that's where I buy it at. And he said, go to the right. And I went to the right. As I walked down the road and I searched for this church, the road come to a T. And when the road come to a T, I really thought that I had outsmarted God, because now I was where God had told me to go, and there was no church. So I looked up with a smile on my face, and I really thought I was going to be able to turn back and go back where I came from. And he said, take a right. The church is on the left. When I took a right and I started walking, a big oak tree just kind of folded back and got away out of my sight. And when it did, a little white church called Trinity Baptist appeared. I went inside and I sat in pew number 5, between pew 4 and 5. Before the service was over, before the altar call was given, before the last hymn was played, before the preacher could say, come forward, I got on my knees in between the pew 4 and 5, and I begged Jesus to forgive me, and I asked him to come into my life, and I asked him to change my heart and become part of me. And he did. That was a day, May 1st, 1983, that Jesus called me out of the grave. But now I would like to share with you what put me in that grave. Because I think there's some of you watching this that's going to know that you have been through the same things I've been through. That you have walked the same steps that I've walked. And that today is going to be the day that Jesus will call you out of the grave. And you will have a decision to make. Will you come out and take off the grave clothes? Or will you stay in the grave where you're more comfortable? You see, when I was 7, that was when the seed of violence and hate was really planted in my life.